Alright guys, today I'm going to be going over part 1 of a series where I am building something I'm calling Geekd AI. Essentially, I see it as much easier to do this now with the OpenAI Assistance API. I kind of held off for a couple days on building it during the whole OpenAI turmoil because I was kind of nervous that the API would not be around in the next couple weeks. But it looks like things are kind of all right there again, so I think we're safe to build with it once more. So this project is not completely done. This is just as far as I've gotten so far, figuring out how I'd like to make my abstractions for the OpenAI API's assistance and how I think that I can turn this into kind of a fun kind of platform for students to use. So to start, let's first talk about what assistance can let you do. So assistants can have as many threads as they want that are standalone. You can add messages to threads, you can modify threads. You can also add a list of file IDs to your assistant when you create it, and these are file IDs of files that you upload to OpenAI, and that allows your assistant to then perform retrieval on that external knowledge and pull it into its context window when dealing with the prompt at hand. So to me, this all seems like they abstract a lot of the nitty-gritty stuff away, allowing me to just focus on the flow that I want from user interaction to backend and then getting the output in a relatively more simple way without me having to do as much work. So the concept that I'm talking about is an AI assistant tutor for each one of your classes, and the way that I see it working is that a lot of these course materials are printable. They could be PDFs, they could be text files, they could be images, and essentially I want to let students upload this course material to a specific assistant. They get to name the assistant so they know what type of course material it's going to be talking about. And then they will have the option to do one of two things. They can either create flashcard questions or they can create interactive quizzes. I've only gotten as far as generating flashcard questions and getting them into a uniform output that I think will not break the backend when I'm using it. So once that assistant has been made and the course material has been uploaded, you can then imagine an assistant for AP Calculus, for AP History, for Biology, for whatever you want. And to me, I'm not trying to make this like a tool for students to cheat, but more so a way for students to have a more interactive learning experience. So I'm hoping that assistants can be a different way for students to learn and interact with the information that they're learning in a way that's not as cut and dry as, like, say, a 40-minute to 60-minute lecture session where you're just listening to the teacher go talk, 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 and more so start to make your own kind of curriculum in a sense where you have more control over the information and the kind of information you want to learn at a specific time, and also being able to dive deeper into specific topics that you think you struggle with more or need more understanding for. So that's the basic concept of the OpenAI Assistance flashcards project that I'm working on. And so just to kind of give a quick overview of what I'm using, we have, a client, we got a server. So I think I'm using like Fast API over here, and then I have Next.js app, and then we have Firestore, which is going to keep track of a couple things, but not as many as I think I'd need to if I was maintaining the state of all the messages and stuff. But because OpenAI takes care of a lot of that stuff for me, and then the only other stuff I need to keep track of is kind of like the flashcard sessions and the quiz sessions, so users can see their progress over time if they want to use the same flashcard set over and over, etc., etc. I'm still thinking out that process as I go along, but I just want to keep everybody up to date in the loop and seeing how I'm doing this. So I'm just kind of going over like the two key core things that I was trying to work on for the past week while I'm working on other stuff as well. And so right now there's just a way where you create an assistant, and then that's pretty self-explanatory because you just hit the assistance endpoints, like create this assistant, and then upload the files to OpenAI and then send the file IDs when you're creating the assistant. And the next big thing is when I have the user decide that they want to use flashcards, they can have an option to choose a previous question set that was already generated, or if they're looking for something new, they can have the assistant tutor generate topics for them to study. So what's going to happen is I'm making a post request with probably like the assistant ID, the user ID, and then I have my server make a request to the OpenAI API, and I have an instruction that kind of looks like this. I say, see if you can read that. You are tasked with generating potential topics that you could create flashcard questions or you have access to in the files uploaded for you. This will help you understand what the user is trying to learn more about, and thus will help you generate flashcard questions that are more relevant to the topics the user would like to learn about. Please generate a list of 4 topics you could generate flashcard questions for. We send that, and then what's going to happen is, in the background, we are essentially getting a thread that we create, and then we're saving that to our Firestore for later use, because I don't really see the need to create as many threads as possible for the same user, for the same assistant. I think that's maybe a little unnecessary at this point. So what we're going to do is we're going to send a API request to OpenAI to the runs endpoint. We're going to give it the thread ID, the message, and then we're going to have it run. And in the background, it's going to retrieve that knowledge for us, because remember in the beginning when we create the assistant, it's going to have access to the files that we give it on creation. And you can also add more files as you go along. You can modify the assistant to have more files. And so we get the topics and then we send them back to the client. And so now I'm going to talk about how we generate the flashcard questions, and then I'm also going to talk about how we are validating this output, because we are converting all of the output to JSON to send to the client before we actually send it to the client, because we want to have a standard interface that we can use and expect certain key value pairs from the data. So I do it with the topics as well, but I think I'm just going to talk about it more so on the generate flashcard side, and we can talk about it. So this is kind of how the flow would look for generating flashcards. If you can see that, we are sending flashcards, and what's happening here is in the first call when we generate the topics, the user is going to select the topic based on its description, and then we're going to send that back to our server. So we're going to add the topic name and description with the assistant ID and the user ID, and then we fetch the thread ID for the user and assistant ID. And then I have another prompt instruction message here that you can see. I'm saying essentially generate flashcard questions, and then also it's almost like a prompt template where I am going to replace these variables with the topic name and topic description that we get back from the request body in the post request to our fast API server. And like you said before, it's going to call the assistance API, it's going to run the thread, and then we are going to have it in the background retrieve the knowledge if it needs to, which I assume it will, because it's going to take the topic and description, look for that in the files, and then see if it can make questions out of that stuff. So once we have generated the flashcard questions, this is what I was talking about earlier, which I don't do. This is what I was talking about earlier, which I believe we do for both topics and flashcards, but I just wanted to show it to you for one call because I think it's a bit repetitive if we talk about it over and over. But essentially, we have a call to GPT-4 Turbo on JSON mode output. So if you're not aware, this is like, I think some people know about this, some people still don't. But you can have the instructions in the model be type JSON object. So right here, you're making a response format JSON object. So what I like about this is I know that I'm getting valid JSON off the rip. And to make sure that I'm getting the same key value pairs every time, and to make sure that it's the format that I specifically want and that I expect, I'm just using Pydantic models to validate the output from this call. And if it's not valid, then we just do a retry, and we do that 3 times. And then if it's not giving me the right output, then we just tell the user that they should try again. Once we have the flashcards, we save them for later for later use in various sessions in the Firestore database, and then we send the flashcards back to the client. So that is enough talking out of me. I think the next thing to do is just kind of show you what this is. So again, this is not done by any means. I just want to show you what I'm doing. And here we go. We're going to create a flashcard session. As you can see, I have other question sets that I could use, but if I would like to, I can load more topics. So I will load a topic, and I'll show you how this is kind of working under the hood once we go through this once, just to show you. So, okay, we've got Native American societies. All right, so we select this. I have no loader. I have no loading state for this, so bear with me. I will probably speed through this because it is still a bit slow for my liking, and I don't want to sit here in the awkward silence. So, yeah, let's, without further ado, get to the next session right now. And boom, so yeah, right now I just have the flow that once the flashcards are generated, it just pops right into the flashcard session. And as you can see, we got questions here like what was the primary aim of the Constitutional Convention. We're also able to show the answer, which I'm going to do because I probably don't know all these. But as you can see, this is kind of the primordial beginnings of the project, and I'm still in development of it because there are a couple things that I have to tweak. That being said, I think that I can go over a bit of the code with you guys and just show you some of the things that I was talking about in relation to the flowchart I showed you and this website that I'm showing you right now. So let's get into that right now. Okay, so we've got a little bit of code right here, some commented out stuff because I was working with this and iterating on it, so there was some stuff that I still have that I haven't implemented yet, so that's why it's commented out. But the way I have it set up is I have a fast API server, I have the app, and I include the routes only assistance router for now with the prefix assistance, so this would be the base URL / assistance, and then the routes of your assistance routes. And I have a couple here. I have quite a lot. Some of these I need to get rid of because, as I said, I started to figure out which ones I needed and which ones I didn't over time. But we have just a couple to go over, you know, upload files for OpenAI and OpenAI Assistant. So these are just uploading them to OpenAI's file system, and then we get the file IDs back, and then we use those to send along to when we create the OpenAI API assistant, because we can only send the file IDs. You can't actually attach the files directly to the assistant. That was something I tried doing in the beginning, but then I was like, oh, I just read the documentation and I was amazed. I had a revelation. It's amazing what documentation can do. But yeah, let's just go over some of the important ones. So right here, generating topics, like I said, we're getting the assistant ID, and then I have some helper functions for my Firestore to retrieve the information that I need. So this is just getting the thread for the user and assistant with the user ID and the assistant ID. And next we have the instructions. Again, you saw this earlier on the flowchart, but just so you can see it again. And let's see, it looks pretty good. And now here's where it gets interesting. So this is my OpenAI assistant class. This is something that I'm kind of also iterating on at the time to see what feels more intuitive for me to use, because it is kind of confusing to me when I first looked at the assistance API. I know there's like these 4 different main parts, which are the assistants, the threads, the messages, and the runs. And to have an assistant actually work, you need to run that thread. So you need a thread to run, and that creates a run. And it's this whole thing. So I can show you a little bit inside of what I'm doing here. So I'm setting the assistant by assistant ID, so I'm not creating a new assistant every time. We're just using the same assistant that we have reference to in our database. So if I go here, we have like default headers, the model, the file IDs. There's some stuff there that needs to go, but we're setting the assistant ID, so you can see that we're just using the client, the OpenAI client, to retrieve the assistants by assistant ID. And then we get the JSON back by calling model dump. I thought it was JSON, but apparently that's deprecated, so maybe it's the version that I'm using. This is the updated version, so they use model dump. And then I return the self, so then we can have compound like chain functions onto this after we set the assistant, which I do after that, which is add message and run thread. So once I do that and I run the thread, I'm then getting the thread ID back from the last run. So inside of this function here, I'm running the thread, and then I have this thing called last run response, which gives us the last response in JSON of the thread. I use that to access the ID of the run that we just called to pull the status. And so this is, again, kind of a limitation of the OpenAI API assistance because they don't allow streaming or support streaming yet, so you just have to pull for the status. So right here, I'm just pulling, retrieve run. If the status is incomplete, failed, or canceled, return the response. And once that's done, we get the thread messages from the assistant. We get the last message because they are in chronological order. And then here's where I have extract topics to JSON. And so this function is being called here. I also have inside of my prompt, I show it what I want it to look like just to reinforce the JSON output that I want. So the schema should look like this. Topics, it's an array with a name and a description, some name and some description. So for this, I didn't implement validation yet just because it's fairly simple, and I think it's fine for the time being as I'm just trying to move fast. And so once we do that, we get the topics and we return them to the client. And so at this point, they will select the topic, and that's where they will call this endpoint right below, which I need to make a better name for this. This was, again, made in the very beginnings. And so I get the topic, and I get the topic name and topic description. The user ID, again, I'm just using a test user ID because I don't have authentication on this server yet. I have my template here where I'm saying what they should be doing, which is generating the flashcard questions based on the topic name and description. We get the flashcard instructions message and we format it to have the topic name and the topic description. Then we convert the message to OpenAI format, so it's just the dictionary of role, user, content, message. And then we get the assistant, we run the thread, and we get the response like we did in the last one. And now here is the kind of the more abstracted generic function that I'm using, and I need to use this for the topics endpoint as well. So we extract data to JSON and we pass in the raw data and then the function to call key, which is flashcard questions. And so I just have a dictionary, a mapping of functions to call. And so we get the extract function and then we get the data model. So the data model would be flashcard questions, which again is a pedantic model, which is validating certain things for me to make sure that I'm getting the right output. And so once we have that, we do extract data with retries. It's going to try 3 times, put the JSON output, validate the JSON data, try data model, true, except, and then we have an exception of a validation error. So once that has all happened, we get the processed flashcards back, and we get flashcard questions because that is the main access point for the array of flashcard questions. So we get the flashcard questions ID from adding the flashcard questions to our Firestore. We then return the flashcard questions and the flashcard questions ID to the client. So that's just a quick overview of the code, just give you a little insight into what I'm doing on that side. Still need to clean up a few things and tie up a few loose ends, but so far it's coming along pretty well. And so with that being said, let's come back and talk about the project as a whole and my thoughts on it and why I'm doing it. And so I just want to talk about really quick why I think applications like this could be super powerful and helpful to students. It's my opinion, and just from my observations of the education system, watching my younger sister go through school and stuff too, I think that we've slowly started to become really good at learning brittle, repetitive tasks and rote memorization. And I think that it really is a different kind of learning where you're not necessarily learning how to learn, you're learning what to learn and when to learn it, and they even teach you the way to learn it, but they don't give you the freedom to try to figure out your own learning style. And I think that more customization and personalization of tools for students to educate themselves and explore topics that interest them and have access to something that can give them rapid feedback, but more attention than a single teacher can, I think is going to really boost the way that students think about the world and how they learn in general. Obviously, you're still gonna have students that want to use this for homework, students that want to use this to cheat on tests, and by all means, that's fine, but I think the only answer to that is to just make the tests harder, the same way that we have tests in advanced math classes that require us to use a calculator, because if we did all the calculations on a scratch piece of paper, we'd probably be there for a day or two instead of 30 minutes doing the test. So I really think that people that are scared of these technologies that are coming out need to try and focus on how they can direct people in the right direction while we still have the opportunity to, instead of letting people, I think that people that are scared of technologies replacing them or, disrupting entire industries, I'm sure that's true for certain types of industries, but I think on the whole, I think we're just going to learn new ways to go about doing things in specific sectors such as education, medicine, science, etc. And I think using the tools to our benefit is something that we should all learn to do more and more. Say you're a student that is trying to learn more about this topic and they really suck at it. Like, whatever the teacher's doing is not working for them. The worksheets don't work. It's terrible. Imagine if you just had your own AI assistant tutor that was there to guide you through everything, had access to all of the course material specific to your class, like not just a generic Google search or ChatGPT. Obviously, you could probably just upload your course materials into custom GPTs for yourself and then have custom GPTs for your own things. So maybe that's a better option than what I'm proposing right here as well. This is all just exploration, but the point being is that we are increasingly seeing accessibility to developers to build more powerful AI applications, and we need to start thinking about how we can actually put those out in the world for people to use, play with, and see how they react to them, what they like, what they don't like, and learn how we can move the world towards a future that we want to see versus one that happens to us and is out of control and, leads to Skynet and us all dying, right? So those are just my thoughts on, why I think AI and education makes such a good mix. I think everybody learns at a different rate. Everybody has different interests. I know I had classes that I just really, for the life of me, could not get into, and I hated it. And sometimes the opposite was true. Sometimes it was the classes that in the past I had hated, I actually loved when I had a teacher that taught me in a different way. And so I think, that happens on the occasion. You have good teachers, and I'm not saying that teachers are bad at their jobs. I'm just saying that something like AI could in the future be objectively better than any human teaching another human. And that's sad, but also good, because that means that we could all learn in our own unique way, and that scales. So those are just my final thoughts on it. If you liked what I shared with you today, if you want to learn more about some of the code, maybe if the whole GitHub repo isn't up, I can put some gists up. And if you are also very interested, just join the Discord. And if you have ideas, suggestions on how this can be better, let me know. Feedback, I would love to see it. Let me get those comments going. I want to get the hate and the love, of course. Can't have one without the other. And yeah, there's no outro. So subscribe. Definitely subscribe. And then, yeah, other than that, there's nothing. So peace, y'all.